should not be watching this thing alone. Now, if you are, that's okay, but it'd be really good if you could watch this with somebody. So when we pause to ask questions, or you're reading scripture, or you're hearing that stuff out loud and you're talking out loud. We're going through the Sermon on the Mount. And in the first chapter of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, Jesus talks a lot about these internal values and looking at the kind of people that are going to be a part of his kingdom. And then he starts to make a shift in chapter 6 where he kind of shows, like, based on these internal values, you're going to start doing things differently externally. Some of those things might be like giving, but giving with good motives, and praying, but praying with good motives. And then we get to something that we're going to talk about today that might cause us to wonder, because we talk about giving, we talk about praying, but fasting? That's not something we talk about very much, although you are going to talk about that today. So let's pause in a moment. It'll be on the screen. I want you to do two things. First off, go ahead and read Matthew chapter 6, verses 16 through 18. And then I want you to pause again and ask this question. Have you ever fasted from anything? And if so, what was that experience like? Catch you back in a minute. As we talk about fasting, it might be easier for us to talk about what fasting is not. So let me tell you a quick story from youth group a couple years ago. I had done a lesson on fasting, and one of the students said, "Hey, I've been fasting from my PlayStation 4 all week." I said, "That's fantastic, great job. We could probably all spend a little less time in front of screens, at least doing stuff like that." I said, "What did you do instead?" His response was, "It was easy, I played Xbox all week." See, one of the truths about fasting, or one of the things that fasting is that fasting is not just giving something up. It does involve giving something up, but it's not just that. Like, oh, I fasted from my PlayStation because I played Xbox instead. That's not really what fasting is. It's not just giving something up. Let me tell you a second story, this time from the Bible. It takes place from the book of Isaiah, which is the prophet Isaiah speaking to the people. And the people had some complaints to bring against God. They were fasting and God wasn't hearing them. And Isaiah responds to them in Isaiah 58 by saying something along the lines of, "You think you're fasting, but you're really not. Like, God has designed fasting to be something different than just a day for you to give up some food or to wear clothing that isn't very comfortable." So here's the second thing fasting is not. Fasting, giving up something, is not some magic formula to get God to do what you want him to do. So first off, it's much more than just giving up something. And it's much more than just some magic formula to get God to do what you want him to do. Here's what fasting is. Now, Jesus said only a little bit about fasting in that scripture you just read, but he does say a couple things that are really important. Here's what fasting is. Fasting is between you and God. And fasting is primarily, not only, but primarily about seeking him. So let's pause the video again. I want you to do two things. The first is to answer a question with the person you're watching with, people you're watching with. It's this question: what is something in your life where you strongly desire God's leading and direction? I'm not talking about where to go eat for dinner, or like, I got a really strongly desire for me to like get an A on this test or get an A in this class. But something deeper than that. What's something you strongly desire God's leading and direction for? And the second thing I want you to do is go and grab a few things from around the house. Grab 2 or 3 objects from around the house that you think symbolize the way that you spend the majority of your time. Go ahead and grab those things, and I'll see you back. Let me tell you a little bit about how we see fasting in the Old Testament. See, some religious leaders in Jesus' day, they fasted twice a week, but that wasn't about any kind of law in the Old Testament. And in fact, there was only one day where all the Jews were required to fast. It's called the Day of Atonement. It's a really big celebration to celebrate the way God had forgiven the people's sin. You can read about that more in Leviticus chapter 16. But Jesus doesn't really command his disciples to fast. He doesn't command them not to fast. He kind of has some nuanced views on fasting, though he does tell us to do that, or say when we do that, here's some things to be aware of. But fasting does show up through some individuals, sometimes through whole communities, throughout the Bible, Old and New Testament. Like Esther, when she had her national crisis of Haman wanting to kill all the Jews, she fasted during that time. Daniel receives a vision in the book of Daniel, and he responds to that vision by fasting and seeking God. Before Jesus begins his ministry, before he chooses his 12 disciples, Jesus fasts in order to seek God's wisdom and direction. So here's what I want you to see with that. There are two primary components to fasting. The first is to deny yourself something. Often we think of food, but it could be something else. And the second is to seek God. So deny yourself something. And the second, seek God. Go ahead and take those objects you grabbed and look at those for a second. Now these symbolize the way you spend a lot of time. Maybe you went and grabbed a pillow because you spend roughly 7 to 9 hours sleeping each day. And well, while that might be something we can do too much of or too little of, God did design us to rest. Maybe you grabbed a pencil or a folder to describe or symbolize schoolwork. And while again, that may be something that we could use less of, I'm sure all of you would love to fast from homework in school. I think it goes a little bit deeper than that because one, that's a season of your life, and two, it's probably something more within school that you need to step away from, like maybe the desire to be popular at any cost. Maybe you grab something like your phone and you say, you know what, I need to spend less time in front of that, or less time in front of a screen playing video games, or less time in front of the TV watching Netflix or watching movies. Maybe that's one. Let me tell you a quick story about that. At our youth group about a week ago, we started this series on Right Now Media called Redeem the Screen, which I would highly recommend that, even though we're only one weekend. And there was a challenge to do some kind of break from our phones, because that's the screen we all looked at most often. And as a group, we decided, like, hey, there are some things we need to step away from in our phones, but to give the entire thing up for a full 24 hours, like, we actually use our phones for some good things too. So here's what we decided. We looked at the app that we spent the most time on. For some, it was a particular game. For some, it was a social media app. For some, it was something like Netflix or YouTube. And we decided we would take a 24-hour fast from that specific app. I'll tell you, I already did mine for this week, and I thought it went fantastic. I would highly recommend doing something like that. But here's my question for you when it comes to fasting. What is something that you can deny yourself from in order to have time to pray and seek after God? Go ahead and talk about that question. I hope that fasting turns into a regular practice for you. Not so you can brag about it, not so you can say, oh, look at me, I'm so spiritual, but so that you have more time to seek after God and seek His direction in what is so crucial in your life. You might find that God has more to say when you stop to listen to Him. I want to end with giving you a challenge and something to pray about. Here's the challenge first off. Choose one thing with the person you're watching with or people you're watching with. Choose one thing to fast from this week. And remember, it's not just I'm not going to play that system or I'm not going to look at that app or whatever, but I'm going to use that extra time to spend in prayer and reading scripture and seeking after God, listening to Him. So choose one thing to fast from this week. And then secondly, I would just encourage you to pray that when you do that, God would honor His side and He would speak to you and you'd have the ears to listen. God bless. I'll see you again next time.